Old Grumpy Hunter here. Someone asked me how much speed do I need. Crossbow manufacturers are selling speed and kinetic energy. Looking at all the ads, you need the fastest one on the market at this time. But is that necessarily true? Getting back to the question, how much speed do I need? That's a difficult one to answer. It's difficult because speed is not the only factor we need to consider. Other factors include, but are not limited to, arrow weight, distance, budget. If you go online, you'll find all kinds of articles and tables that give recommendations for what is needed to kill most any type of animal. You can add this video to the list if you want. You will find tables that look something like this one. You see that there is nothing mentioned about speed, arrow weight, etc. Kinetic energy is mostly dependent on speed. The formula is Ke equals mv squared. It's the squaring of the speed in the formula that makes the dramatic changes in kinetic energy. Doubling the speed quadruples the kinetic energy. When using the information seen in the image, and by rearranging the formula, you can find the arrow weight used. Just whip out your phone and punch in the formula into the calculator app like this. Weight equals kinetic energy times 450,240 divided by speed.
Wait a minute. Where did that 450,240 come from?
The kinetic energy formula is based on kilograms and meters. There has to be a conversion factor when using grains and feet per second. That factor is 450,240. To calculate kinetic energy using grains and feet per second, the formula looks like this. Kinetic energy equals mass times velocity squared divided by the factor. Doing the math, we can see that the arrow weight is 400 grains. According to Realtree.com, the white-tailed deer is the most hunted animal in North America, or at least it was on January 10th, 2018. If kinetic energy is your goal, then how fast does your initial speed need to be to have 25 foot-pounds at 30 yards to kill a whitetail with a 400 grain arrow? First, we need to find the needed speed of the arrow at the target. By rearranging the Ke formula, we can calculate the arrow speed at the target. Arrow speed equals the square root of the quantity kinetic energy times 450,240 divided by arrow weight. Doing the math, we find the arrow speed at the target is 167.75 feet per second. Using an arrow ballistics calculator, we can find that the initial speed to give us a kinetic energy of 25 at 30 yards is just over 174 feet per second. These two tables show an initial speed of between 174 and 175 feet per second is needed to get that 25 foot-pounds of kinetic energy at the target. What if you want enough kinetic energy to kill any big game animal in North America? You can see from the table that you need a minimum of 65 foot-pounds. What is the initial speed needed? Well, again, rearranging the Ke formula, the speed needed at 30 yards is 270.49 feet. Going through the same process as before, we can find that initial speed is just over 282 feet per second is needed to get the arrow speed and the kinetic energy needed at the target. So far I've been keeping the shot distance at 30 yards. But what about further out? How far are you comfortable shooting at? It's not uncommon to read about archers taking shots at 60 yards and longer. This table shows the initial speeds to reach a minimum of 65 foot-pounds of kinetic energy at the given distances, along with the speed at the target and the flight times using a 400 grain arrow. But wait, there's more. Look at the fine print in the ad or on the box, and it'll read something like this: speeds up to XXX feet per second. So are you really getting that advertised kinetic energy? Does it say what arrow weight was used to get that big print speed? Some do, but from my experience, most don't. You can quickly figure out the arrow weight by using the calculator app on your phone and calculating the arrow weight like this. Arrow weight equals Ke times 450,240 divided by the speed squared. Arrow weight's 399.98 grains, so let's round it to 400 grains, and the arrow weight is an important factor. But it's not all about kinetic energy. When hunting with a rifle, it's recommended that at the point of impact, the bullet should have 3,100 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Well, that's interesting. The crossbow we just talked about has a kinetic energy of 153 foot-pounds at firing, but when using a rifle, you need 3,100 at a target? I find this interesting on a couple fronts. A 44-40 rifle has a maximum muzzle velocity of 1,100 feet per second with a 250 grain bullet. That's a kinetic energy of 671.86 foot-pounds. A 45 Colt rifle has a maximum muzzle velocity of 1,150 feet per second with a 225 grain bullet. That's 660.9 foot-pounds. Frank C. Barnes, the late author of Cartridges of the World, said this about the 44-40. It is said that it has killed more game, large and small, and more people, good and bad, than any other commercial cartridge ever developed. Do you have any idea how many big game animals were taken with these two calibers? If you need a minimum of 3,100 foot-pounds of kinetic energy as a target with a bullet, how on earth can you kill anything with an arrow? After all, the crossbow talked about before will only have 141 foot-pounds of kinetic energy at 30 yards. That's way short of 3,100 foot-pounds. Furthermore, deer don't read ballistic tables. Kinetic energy is defined as the total energy of a body in motion. It is an energy and not force, and is very dependent on the object's velocity. Studies conducted by the U.S. Army indicate that tissue shock from hydraulic compression becomes significant only at velocities at or above 2,500 feet per second. Hydraulic shock will not happen with an arrow. With an arrow, when kinetic energy is increased, there will be an increase in penetration. This is because the speed increase needed to get more kinetic energy also increased the arrow's momentum. The extra penetration will not be proportional to the increase in kinetic energy. Dr. Ed Ashby states that kinetic energy is not the correct unit of measurement for calculating any of the forces relative to penetration.
If it's not about kinetic energy, what is it about?
With an arrow, it's about penetration. I'm not saying that light, fast setups are inadequate, because when used properly, they work. Personally, I want to shoot an arrow that will blow through the shoulder of any animal I'm hunting. Sorry, I digress. The question was about speed, about how much speed. Well, what are your goals? Are you trying to shoot out to 100 yards at a deer? Are you trying to get the arrow to the deer before the deer has a chance to react? Are you concerned about flight times? In past videos, I've talked about a deer's reaction time to sound. Let's look at that again. Humans have an average reaction time of 0.15 seconds to a noise. That is the time it takes us to react after hearing something. It's hard to calculate the deer's reaction time, but we can figure it's faster than ours. I'm going to use 0.15 seconds as a worst case for the deer in my examples. The speed of sound is 1,125.328 feet per second. Why did I mention that? We need to know that to do some of our calculations when trying to get the arrow to the deer before it moves. This table shows the time it takes for the sound of the shot to go a given distance out to 100 yards in 10-yard increments. This table shows the time it will take the deer to react to the same distance. It's based on the time it takes the sound to reach the deer and the reaction time we're using of 0.15 seconds. Let's say your goal is to get the arrow to the deer before it has a chance to move. What initial speed do you need? Using a 400 grain arrow, I used a ballistics calculator and was able to come up with the following table. The information in the green area can be achieved with crossbows that are currently on the market. The orange area is in our dreams. Although the 480 foot per second is not too far at this time, with the fastest crossbow as of October 2020 being rated at 460 feet per second with a 400 grain arrow. Remember this crossbow shooting at 415 feet per second with a 400 grain arrow? How far can you shoot and get the arrow to the deer before the deer moves? In this table you'll see that at 35 yards the deer can be on the move before the arrow gets there. Taking a look at a bow shooting at 460 feet per second with a 400 grain arrow, in this table even at 40 yards the deer can be on the move before the arrow gets there. Even with the fastest crossbow on the market, shooting beyond 35 yards, the deer will have a chance to be on the move before the arrow reaches it. Admittedly, it won't be moving very long. When talking about flight times, one thing you have to remember is that the arrow will never outrun the speed of the sound of the shot. This table shows flight times in seconds out to 100 yards with initial speeds ranging from 150 to 500 feet per second in 25 feet per second increments. The area in green are flight times that are faster than the reaction time. The red area are flight times that are greater than 1 second. How much are you willing to spend to get the speed you want? The table shows 14 crossbows that were available as of March 16, 2020. The most expensive in both manufacturer's suggested retail price and on Amazon, I used Amazon only because it was handy, is a 10-point Vapor RS 470. That happens to be the fastest crossbow currently available as far as I know. It is rated at 470 feet per second using a 360 grain arrow. With 400 grains, it's rated at 460 feet per second. The least expensive is from Southland. Excalibur and Southland are both recurves. The average price in this list is $1,400.36, which is closest to the Barnett Predator. The key to bow hunting, no matter what kind, is to cause major bleeding. How do you cause major bleeding? With a razor-sharp broadhead and an ideal shot placement, no matter how fast the arrow is. You may have noticed that I used the 400 grains in all my calculations. The only reason I did that was because of this image. You recall calculating arrow weight based on kinetic energy in the feet per second? If you change the arrow weight, the arrow speed will change. Adding weight will slow the arrow, increasing flight times. In my video, Flight Times, I compared flight times of different arrow weights and different speeds. This table shows what happens to flight times when starting with a 400 grain arrow at 350 feet per second and adding 25 grains at a time. The speed change is based on the rule of thumb that for every 5 grains increase in speed, there will be a 1 foot per second drop. This table shows flight times out to 20 and 30 yards with a 400 grain arrow shot at different speeds. I know that I have not directly answered your question on how much speed do I need. I hope that the information that I have provided will be of some help in your decision on what to buy. Thank you for watching this Old Grumpy Hunter presentation. Please give it a big thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and don't forget to push the notification bell. Until next time, aim small, miss small.